Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
It is my great pleasure to welcome our 4 final panelists, and our first speaker is Catharine Dada.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions, Professor Carol Cusack, for inviting me, and greetings to everyone here and the hundreds and hundreds of people on Zoom. I am particularly glad to be presenting after that delicious panel on embodiment, and honored to follow such luminaries. My talk is about the work of the Polish theater director Jerzy Grotowski, who is widely honored in the world of theater. He's seen to have revolutionized theater, and yet most of his notable work from 1983 onwards was conducted in seclusion. Grotowski was supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, by the MacArthur Foundation. He was, not long before he died, he was the chair at the Collège de France. And 10 years after he died in 1999, 10 years after he died, 2009, UNESCO declared 2009 the year of Grotowski. So he's obviously deeply significant in the world of theater. Briefly stated, his work articulated experiences of spirituality within the body. And I would like to explore where the narratives of Grotowski and Gurdjieff converge, hopefully affirming a place for Grotowski as an independent fourth-way teacher working in the medium of theater, even if it would probably be against Grotowski's own wishes to do so. So in March of 1924 in New York, Gurdjieff spoke publicly about actors and an objective understanding of the craft of acting. It's been published as Views from the Real World. And he placed the art form of acting in the context of mystery, noting that performers used to be vessels for a non-ordinary reality, that the consciousness of an actor, of a trained actor in ancient drama, the consciousness was trained. And he stated that acting students were taught then to be aware of the unconscious manifestations of their feelings, their thoughts, and their desires in order to be a clear vessel so that the experiences that they were conveying to the audience could be clear and free from their own personal thoughts and limitations. In Jerzy Grotowski's most famous text called Towards a Poor Theater, he speaks to the same notion of controlling one's own unconscious manifestations in order that the actor is free to convey the impressions needed for the performance. He states, "Our work is a via negativa, not a collection of skills, but an eradication of blocks." So Gurdjieff believed that the modern theater only existed for propaganda or amusement. It's not creative, he said, and its effect is an intensification of the mechanicality of both performer and spectator. Grotowski was determined not to teach actors what he referred to as a bag of tricks, reflecting Gurdjieff's understanding of the meaninglessness of an actor's posturings. In Views, Gurdjieff speaks of the need for actors to be real artists in the context of objective art. We have spoken about the spectrum producing white light. A man can be called an actor only if he is able, so to speak, to produce a white light. Grotowski believed that performers could be like figures in an El Greco painting who can illuminate through personal technique, becoming a source of spiritual light. Gurdjieff believed that the profession of acting for the public only made it harder for the person to evolve in the quest for self-realization, and perhaps it was an understanding of this belief that led Grotowski to abandon the public domain of theater in search of developing the spiritual nature of his performers, working in seclusion at the University of California, Irvine, and later at his work center in Pontedera, Italy. Grotowski's work during his objective drama phase at UC Irvine from 1983 to 1984 bears striking resemblances to Gurdjieff's objective art without referencing Gurdjieff or locating the work in the system of the Fourth Way lineage. Grotowski was interested in seeing if the structure of a movement could have an objective and transformative effect on a performer, stimulating one to enter an organic stream of impulses. In Gurdjieff's terms, Grotowski's explorations could be seen through the lens of the ray of creation and a physical manifestation of a flow through the law of octaves. Director Peter Brook, a vocal proponent of Gurdjieff's work and a great admirer of Grotowski, noted distinct similarities between Gurdjieff's concept of descent through the ray of creation and the attendant potential of an ascent of energy occurring through man and Grotowski's theater work. Grotowski admitted to, quote, exploring the same terrain as Gurdjieff, citing the concept of ascending and descending energy. Instead, he called it verticality. And Grotowski stated that a visceral awareness of this verticality provides the means for an organic awareness of the consciousness, which is not linked to language, but to presence. Both men affirm the immediacy of an impulse and action are rooted in an awareness of presence. Grotowski then goes on to say, and finally, there is the question of the return, which is the key, and this possible return passes only through persons. This statement directly reflects Gurdjieff's Fourth Way work, the ray of creation's involutionary descent into man, and return ascent, which occurs through man. Grotowski was hoping to discover an objective quality inherent at the genesis of all rituals, and he was interested in what movements and sounds could directly impact the perception and consciousness of the practitioner. His words, when I refer to ritual, I speak of its objectivity. That is to say, the elements of the action are, through their direct impact, the instruments of the work on the body, heart, and the head of the doers. This is a clear link to Gurdjieff's vision of the Fourth Way, to directly impact the individual's consciousness, transcending the limitations of ordinary art, and placing the participant in touch with Gurdjieff's definition of an objective world. In Grotowski's work, such a state not only aimed to affect the participant, but in an exact mirror of the Fourth Way work, Grotowski believed it should also have the ability and the potential to impact the world itself. Gurdjieff believed that one should both teach and learn, not only through the mind, but also through the feelings and the body, as we have heard so eloquently in the presentations earlier today. In their objective work, both men use the body as doorways to and the means for a manifestation of awareness. Art, as a way of accessing objective knowledge, is explained by Gurdjieff. In the past, art served the same purpose today as is served by books, the purpose of preserving and transmitting certain knowledge. In ancient times, they expressed knowledge in works of art. Grotowski stated that in the objective drama work, he hoped to rediscover a very old form of art as a way of knowledge. Grotowski's work aimed to transcend the limitations of mechanical artistry and sought to move the performer into the realm of Gurdjieff's subjective world, where the work could have a direct and quantifiable impact on both the perception and the state of the performer. So there's a clear link between the movements of Gurdjieff and Grotowski's motions work. Both rely on physical details, precisely codified, repeated in exactly the same fashion. And Grotowski could also be seen to have modeled himself on Gurdjieff. Both men were unashamedly elitist. Neither made it easy to find or access their work. Film showings of the movements and Grotowski's motions are offered by invitation only. Grotowski was considered a guru by his students, and both men pushed people to the limits of their physical endurance. Sessions during the objective drama phase went on until the very early hours of the morning. There were grueling, absolutely grueling exercise routines. Grotowski called it inviting the body to do the impossible. Then the body could, quote, become a channel open to the energies and to find the conjunction between the rigor of the elements and the flow of life. This is absolutely in line with Gurdjieff's super effort as a means for breaking through to a higher level of awareness. And yet, Grotowski himself never publicly acknowledged the debt that he owed to Gurdjieff. He claimed not to have read any material about or by Gurdjieff until his own theatrical ideas were already set. Even in 1991, when Grotowski was interviewed by Brooke, he still maintained that paradoxically, when he was writing Towards a Poor Theater and developing his ideas, that he didn't know who Gurdjieff was. That interview, it's called A Kind of Volcano. If you get a chance to read it, it's absolutely fascinating. It's in the Needleman Barker text on Gurdjieff. And Grotowski works very hard to dance around the subject of the possibility that his work might have been modeled on Gurdjieff's. And I don't think for one moment that the interview would have happened had it occurred, had it been conducted by anyone other than Peter Brook. And Grotowski does admit in that interview that there are practical comparisons between his work and Gurdjieff's, and that he appreciates Gurdjieff's spirit of inquiry. Professor Oginski, who is perhaps the most committed Grotowskian scholar, he's Polish, he was a great friend of Grotowski. He only ever tangentially referenced Gurdjieff's work while Grotowski was still alive. And 10 years after Grotowski's death, and when asked outright about the impact that Gurdjieff might have had on Grotowski, he said that in 1982, which is just before Grotowski left Poland, that Grotowski had given him a copy of Meetings with Remarkable Men, saying that it was a deeply important book to him, and that Grotowski considered Gurdjieff to be a personal icon. But this was only publicly stated 10 years after Grotowski's death, and because he was asked directly at a conference that I was attending. This information was not volunteered. When he was writing Towards a Poor Theater, Grotowski might not have known who Gurdjieff was, but by 1982, he certainly did know. And it's in Grotowski's work after 1982, from 1982 to when he died in 1999, where the strong resemblances lie. So the links between Grotowski's work and Gurdjieff's are so strong that in November 2001, which is 2 years after Grotowski's death, the Polish Grotowski Center had a conference devoted to Gurdjieff and the movements. Peter Brook and James Moore were there. And since that time, a Gurdjieff group has formed at the Polish Grotowski Center so that they can learn the movements. Gurdjieff himself stated that the fourth way was never a permanent one, that it would appear and disappear, governed by its own peculiar laws. When the aim of the work was accomplished, the school itself would disappear or perhaps continue in another form. Grotowski's theatrical work and its ongoing presence at the centers in Pontedera and in Poland could be seen as a theatrically based manifestation of the fourth way work. Thank you.
One of the advantages of being an art history lecturer is that it's the images where you need to be looking, not at the speaker. should tell you very briefly that although I've, over the long years of my study of icons, have a certain reputation of being an expert, all my theologically specialist Orthodox friends, you can turn the light off, I don't need it. Thank you. My Orthodox theology friends regard me as a heretic. And my art history friends regard me as a crank. But when all my friends were at college, I never went to college, I was discovering In Search of the Miraculous and Uspensky's writing and Gurdjieff and the work. And then I discovered icons and my interest in the early centuries of Christianity. So everything I've ever said about icons over the last 60 years and what I hope I can share with you in the next 12 or 13 minutes is that way round, if you see what I mean. So this is an image which we all know because it's in us, as has been said in different ways today. And it relates to the icon that I want to discuss with you. What we're looking at is the background of the icon of St. George and the Dragon, with St. George and the Dragon out of the picture. Because what we've got is the same image, what the Neoplatonists, where a lot of what I'm interested in came from, call the perceptible universe. In fact, that's the rocky desert landscape and the starry sky. We don't see the starry sky in the diagram. And the icon, as we'll see in a moment, also has elements of the universe beyond perception, i.e. the divine world, heaven, the absolute, and the lower darkness, the pit, hell, as the cosmic polarity, if you like. So here's the icon. It's a well-known late 14th or 15th century icon in Russia, in a museum in St. Petersburg. And we see this, what I call cosmic landscape, in the background. The marvelous red sky, the firmament, the quadrant at the top representing the circle indicating the divine world or heaven or the absolute, from which the hand of God emanating energy descending. And below, in the left-hand corner, you see the pit, the darkness, the lower world, what the Neoplatonists call absolute non-being, from which emerges the serpent or the dragon. And central, St. George, the spiritual warrior. This is coming really from the hesychast tradition. You know about hesychasm. It was the mystical contemplative practice of the Byzantine monastic world, first of all in the desert in the 5th century, later in Mount Athos, revived very strongly in the 14th century in Constantinople under the St. Gregory Palamas, at the time that it passed to Russia, where it survived through the fall of after the fall of Constantinople in the tradition of Russian Orthodox mysticism. The word hesychasm means silence or stillness. So this is the condition of the meeting place of all these energies, we could say cosmic energies, coming down, and chthonic energies, earth forces, coming up, and the meeting, the interaction through the spiritual work of the spiritual warrior. The Philokalia, which we've also heard about, speaks about silent warfare or unseen warfare. This is the true meaning of the warrior as a symbol. So just to recap a little bit, this is the Neoplatonist world vision of the world in the stages, terminology coming out of the writings of Plotinus. He changes his terminology all the time, never allowing us to fix his thought in a dogmatic way. Very briefly, the one, or sometimes the absolute in his terminology, the divine mind, the all soul, these are the three hypostases. And then on the next stage, the supernals, archetypes, the gods, the world of celestial intelligences, or the stars sometimes, divine spirits, man, below man, matter, evil, and the level of absolute non-being. This is the vision of the universe that Christianity, when it started to emerge from its first 100 years underground, encountered in the Greco-Roman world in Rome in the 2nd or 3rd century. And it was Plotinus and his followers, Iamblichus, Porphyry, who interacted with what was the new movement appearing, the Christians. And a 5th century Platonist known as Dionysius, scholars have to call him pseudo-Dionysius because the real Dionysius is St. Paul's pupil in Athens, and pseudo-Dionysius lived in the 5th century. He was what we call a Christian Neoplatonist, and he takes this stages of the universe called the doctrine of degrees, or the great chain of being, so that above human beings, angels, archangels, principalities and powers. St. Paul refers to the principalities and powers, dominions, thrones, cherubim and seraphim. This is the Christianized version of the Platonic or Neoplatonic doctrine of degrees. I was always interested in this because one of the first great ideas I ever encountered, age 19 or 20, was Gurdjieff's ray of creation. So I couldn't help putting these versions of the doctrine of degrees. On the left here, we have the Christian angelic hierarchy. I couldn't help also dipping in, as one can on the internet nowadays, to what astrophysics has to say about it all. And I'm very grateful for what Charles brought, because it's there, the doctrine of degrees. The solar systems, the star clusters, the Milky Way, what they call local groups, galaxy clusters, superclusters, the hundreds and thousands of billions of galaxies. It's incomprehensible to the ordinary mind, but this idea that it obeys this law is there in a rather amateurishly put together diagram. And on the right, a famous icon in St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai of the ascent of John Climacus from earth to heaven through a series of steps or stages. So the icon, we can see it as an expression of the law of seven, the octave. In the upper part, the kingdom of heaven, the firmament, this red sky, St. George the warrior, the horse, one of the forces, one of the energies, the level of matter from which is personified maybe by the serpent, lower down the darkness, and at the bottom hell, or absolute non-being, as the Neoplatonists call it. I show you a couple of images to show that this language of the cosmology as the hidden symbol behind the events depicted. This is a classic Russian icon type of the descent of divine energies. You can just see the little quadrant in the top left and the light signifying the divine energies received by the evangelist, St. John, in the process of passing it on to his disciple. And it's no coincidence that the disciple, Prochorus, is placed in front of the darkness, the pit. So the icon depicts the transition or transmission from the highest to the lowest according to the chain of being, or the doctrine of degrees. And equally for the classic icon of the Nativity, the diagram shows us the same landscape, the rocky mountain, the divine world represented by the lunette at the top, from which descends the divine energies, and the representative of the lower, the darkness. It's very interesting that in the Orthodox tradition, Christ is born in the cave, in the darkness. That begins at the lowest level of the cosmos. So this is a well-known image in Constantinople, Istanbul, currently covered up, I believe, of Christ's descent into hell. You can see the bars and broken locks, and as the gates of hell have been smashed open, and he descends, rescuing us. So here the universe has been turned inside out. Extraordinary drama. And we need to remember that this takes place in silence. This is a Russian version of the same story. As a work of art, it has this extraordinary stillness. All the symbolism is there, the diagram of the cosmos is there, but it's painted in such a way that is totally out of the material world, an inner event. I haven't time to analyze the artistic qualities of the icon, but it has this quality of stillness, of silence, despite the drama of the event. The artist has arranged the forms and the colors that are extraordinarily harmonious. I want to come to the end with an icon of Christ, Byzantine image, and particularly to draw attention to the letters around the head of Christ, the Greek oon, I am, or as it is in the King James Bible, I am that I am. So this is, as I see it, the inner realization of the cosmic drama of the spiritual warrior, negotiating the energies above and below to create order, stillness, the the aim of the hesychast from his interior work or her interior work.
When I was asked to say something about Gurdjieff's music, I felt that maybe I wasn't the right choice, because when I'm asked to speak about the music and to say something about it, my response is, you just have to listen to it. It's another language. And it's not a language. There's been, of course, much written about music, thousands and thousands of pages and books, analyses, and so on about music in general. But I contend that its real transmission is actually the music itself. Nevertheless, there is a whole group of pieces written by Gurdjieff with de Hartmann, showing that he valued and felt that music would be a vehicle for the transmission of what he was trying to bring. What are the characteristics of his music? First, it's in great variety, the nearly 300 pieces which they wrote together, of which nearly 200 are published, all the way from hymns, rituals, which he put into the music, music that he heard in his travels. He was under the influence, as was de Hartmann, from birth, of the Orthodox Church and the music which came from it, and which has its origins in ancient songs, ancient hymns. He was influenced by his travels also, where he heard in villages songs and melodies and dances that he felt also contained in it understanding of human life, sometimes preserved for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. The symbol of the ray of creation and the octave, of course, are known most through our understanding of the octave, the musical octave. But even the musical octave, to us who love music, is a mystery and is in fact contains in one tone of music a myriad set of intervals from which all music finally is heard. In the overtone series, which is the building block of a tone of music, when we hear a tone of music, we hear one sound. But in fact, it's a multiplicity of thousands, in fact, of an infinite number of vibrations which take place simultaneously within that tone. So scale was very important to Gurdjieff, and he speaks about it in Beelzebub, having each locale in some of the villages he visited using different scales for them to express the music that was part of them. So when he comes to the West, he's confronted with actually a rather crude scale. Crude in the sense that it's artificial, the well-tempered scale. And I bring this up because it seems to not coincide with his feeling about the way music needs to touch another human being. But as he adapted so many things which were Western, he adapted to this also and wrote this music with de Hartmann. And I need to say something about de Hartmann and who he was. To make it rather simple, he was out of that same group of Russian composers and artists, Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, who came out of Russia with an incredible pedagogy and training. De Hartmann himself was on his way to have a great career as a composer. And when he met Gurdjieff, he devoted his entire creative output for 12 years to serve Gurdjieff's aim. So today, in the world of the Western world of music, his name is hardly heard. But I want to say one thing that recently occurred about de Hartmann's other writing. Recently, there has been a recording made by Joshua Bell and the Ukrainian Orchestra of his violin concerto. And I feel I can say, as a student of Western music, that this violin concerto would have taken its place, along with the other great concertos that were written at that time, had his name been known. So what de Hartmann did was to recognize that what he was searching for in music was going to be possible if he could serve Gurdjieff's aim. So we have de Hartmann's account in his book, Our Life with Gurdjieff, about how this music eventually evolved. When the very first piece that we know of that came into existence was an Esentuki, and it's called the Esentuki Prayer. And it was actually sung. The people learned it by singing it. Later, de Hartmann made a piano transcription. So from the 1916 until around 1924, 25, only a handful of pieces were written. But the 2 years beginning right after his accident and the beginnings of the writing of Beelzebub, there was week after week of music coming out. One could say, or one could surmise, that it was simply a matter of dictation, and de Hartmann simply noted it down. And one could even be somewhat fooled by that when you see his immaculate calligraphy of the pieces that he wrote, and when you see the stages of development in the writing of a composition. But it was Madame de Salzmann who conveyed to a few of us that it was not simply a matter of that. It was a matter of de Hartmann understanding what it was Gurdjieff wished for. And yes, it's true, there were some pieces, according to what's been said, that were, every note was dictated to and agreed to by Gurdjieff. But what she said was that at a certain point, when he saw that de Hartmann understood what he was looking for, that then de Hartmann would develop what was necessary. Are there any characteristics that are uniquely Gurdjieff to Hartman? There was one that I think struck me from the early days that I heard the music. I already was steeped in Mahler and Brahms and Beethoven and Stravinsky. But it was the sparing use of all the notes that were written. The open fifth, which has a unique sound, which is the first, actually the second, but the first overtone that appears in a tone of music. It is something I would call more objective than the triad. And this permeates much of the music, both in what he wrote for the music for the movements and what he wrote in the pieces of music that we now hear. This collaboration, though, also underlies something else. It wasn't just a musical collaboration, but it was one of the principles that Gurdjieff himself brought in his teaching, is that we needed to work together. So when I began this talk, I said, it's listening to the music. And I feel that still remains essential. But how to listen to the music? Is this music objective art? So many of you know that when an instrumentalist plays, he has to tune his instrument every time, again and again. And for me, the way to listen to this music is to begin our own attunement. It has no meaning without this relationship. And we've heard it said at different times during this incredible day. It's a way of emptying my thoughts, my perceptions, and to simply listen. It doesn't happen overnight, and because it happened once, it doesn't happen again. It's my struggle as well when I'm playing to listen. Thank you.
Objective art. G.I. Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff's influence on esoteric aesthetics in American literature. A vast underground esoteric literary movement pervaded and directed American literature from 1923 until the 1960s. I have named this lost literary movement Eurasian modernism. Central to this movement were the teachings of G.I. Gurdjieff. Eurasian modernism purported to be objective literature in the mold of Gurdjieff's Beelzebub's Tales. While Gurdjieff's book was believed to possess a key, the Eurasian modernists did not have the key. They went around this lack by substituting the code in which the European alchemists wrote their alchemical writings, the phonetic, syllabic, C-A-B-A-L-A, like the horse in Spanish, Kabbalah. Thus, the writings of the Eurasian modernists were standardized by the use of a code and by the inclusion of Gurdjieff's teachings in their various writings, whether novels, short stories, poems, dramas, screenplays, memoirs, or journalism. Briefly, I was able to discover this lost literary movement because the writer that I concentrated on for my doctoral dissertation happened to be one of the only Eurasian modernists who afforded a direct access to the Kabbalah code. Though many of Gurdjieff's followers were writers, he did not encourage them to write. Gurdjieff sent A.R. Orage to New York in 1924 to direct the American branch of his school. Orage was a major figure in literary modernism besides his teachings of the Gurdjieff work. He established a literary movement. Orage's importance to modern literature attracted many writers to follow the Gurdjieff work. Orage's role in the American school included leading creative writing classes and individually advising writers. The Oragean literary influence was pervasive and penetrated all of New York publishing. Working side by side with Orage was best-selling author Carl Van Vechten. Van Vechten had already invented a new form of the novel that I call the emblematic novel. Orage instructed his followers in this style. The Van Vechten-Oragean style of fiction was aimed in the same direction as Beelzebub's tales, namely to challenge the automism that the reader brought to the act of reading. However, the Van Vechten-Oragean style did not directly imitate the extreme difficulty of Gurdjieff's science fiction. Oragean writers, by and large, produced literary works that in most cases seem to be completely conventional. Other works were challenging, with difficulties varying from the eccentric John Dos Passos, Juna Barnes, Nathaniel West, James Agee, E.E. Cummings, to the incomprehensible Mina Loy, Melvin Tolson, William Carlos Williams. Yet, when the seemingly conventional writings are read with attention, they too prove to be problematic. In other words, all of Gurdjieffian objective literature must be actively read. Oragean modernist writings conform to the requirements of, and I'm using this in quotes, objective in quotes, literature in name only. Objective literature for Gurdjieff was understood to be the product of those possessing cosmic consciousness, but Orage's followers ignored this requirement and substituted concepts that could be found in published accounts of the Gurdjieff work. No initiation was required to obtain the ideas. The motivation behind the production of these pseudo-objective writings was that they would transmit esoteric ideas to the people of the present day so that they could be recruited if a reader possessed a magnetic center, that's also in quotes. It was possible that the esoteric ideas in the text would attract the reader and lead to the discovery of the esoteric school. It was also thought that should the planet meet with destruction, the objective writings could transmit esoteric concepts to the people of a future age. According to Gurdjieff, Beelzebub's Tales was such a writing that was aimed at an audience in the remote future. Gurdjieff called these works of literature legomenisms, and the followers of Orage thought of their writings as legomenisms. However, Gurdjieff's legomenisms were based on intentional errors in a cosmic law, and the Oragean writers merely indulged in non-lawful errors. In other words, they just put mistakes of every variety into their work. Some of the mistakes are hilarious. An important attribute of the writings by Raj's followers was that they employed the ancient phonetic code used by the medieval alchemist, the Kabbalah. The use of this code concealed an inner content. The texts also contained hints about the existence to the hidden material and clues to assist in the reading of the coded sections. The Arajian literary program can be compared to an industrial business. Thousands of esoteric writings were produced. The Arajian writers produced specific product lines. One assembly line produced historical novels. Another produced detective fiction. Another produced a line of comic novels in the vein of Yves Lenoir. Another line put out Western novels. I'm going to interrupt myself here. I swore I wasn't going to do this, but I have to tell you this. My favorite Western novel in this vein has no cows in it. That's the mistake, just so you understand. Another line produced memoirs. Many canonical writers produced these esoteric writings, for example, Raymond Chandler, John Dos Passos, John O'Hara, William Faulkner, James Agee, Nathaniel West, Juna Barnes, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, Zora Neale Hurston, Ralph Ellison, Thomas Wolfe, Thornton Wilder. Many of Araja's followers were prolific, such as Vardis Fisher, Frank Yerby, Chester Himes, Don Powell, and Laura Z. Hobson. Given the astonishing volume of published writings by the Arajian literary movement, we have to credit Araj with having developed an impressive program. The determining factor in the development of objective literature by Araj's followers was the rejection of Gurdjieff himself while retaining his teachings. In Carl van Vechten's novel, The Blind Bowboy, 1923, Gurdjieff is already presented unsympathetically as the Duke of Middlebottom, a theatrical impresario. Middlebottom in England is the site of an inaccessible pebble beach below the chalk cliffs. The cliff inevitably suggests the tarot card, the Fool, who is perched on a cliff. The Fool card is numbered 0 and means folly, mania, and extravagance. Van Vechten's emblematic novel was based on alchemical texts, the tarot, Gurdjieffian ideas, and was written in the Kabbalah code. Many such novels followed. The most successful of these emblematic novels was Thornton Wilder's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Bridge of San Luis Rey, 1927, which has made several best 100 novels lists and is widely taught in schools. In Wilder's novel, Gurdjieff is Uncle Pio, whose name decodes to pelican, a symbol of Christ's sacrifice for humanity. Uncle Pio is one of the victims of the collapsing bridge, which plunges him to death in a river gorge. As a result of the split between Araj and Gurdjieff in 1931, Gurdjieff appears thereafter in Arajian modernist writings as an out-and-out villain. In many cases, there are distinct clues that can be used to identify Gurdjieff. Often references are made to his prominent eyes and his sallow complexion. Wordplay involving his name is also commonly used. At times, the allusions to Gurdjieff are more obscure and require a familiarity with Gurdjieff in order to identify him. For instance, Brother Jack in Ralph Ellison's novel Invisible Man, 1953, is revealed as a stand-in for Gurdjieff when his glass eye pops out of his head. The goal of the work is to achieve one eye, one harmonious identity, and this is parodied by Brother Jack's disability. His one eye is caused by missing an eye. Prominent, it only gets better and worse. Prominent humorist, satirist, screenwriter S.J. Perelman's esoteric novel, Parlor, Bedlam, and Bath, 1930, concerns Chester Tattersall, whose name is code for Astral Christ. Here we see an instance where something truly esoteric is divulged in an Oragian modernist novel. We want to look at another of Perelman's creations, the Marx Brothers film Monkey Business, 1931. The film was a critical and box office success. The names of the characters and the script contain esoteric allusions. This is the, what should we call this, orthodox picture of Gurdjieff. This is how people at the time are thinking of him. This is him in Monkey Business. His name is Captain Corcoran, and I know this is ridiculous, but it's not my code. Corcoran is actually a clue to Gurdjieff's name once you get indoctrinated to this kind of nonsense. The piece de resistance comes about when villainous Captain Corcoran is mockingly shorn of his mustache. Here the mustache is evidence the captain is Gurdjieff. Another Gurdjieffian villain appears in Raymond Chandler's novel, The Big Heat, 1939. In the 1953 movie version of the story, the alien colonel also hires Marlowe, like Captain Corcoran wears, he wears the same mustache as Gurdjieff and Captain Corcoran. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. This just begs to keep making silly comments. Uncle Charlie, in Thornton Wilder's film Shadow of a Doubt, 1943, lacks the mustache but retains Gurdjieff's cane. And this is the most interesting of these Oragian villains. What he also brings to the film are Gurdjieff's most notorious characteristics. Gurdjieff often took on outrageous roles in public. Uncle Charlie hides in his berth for the duration of the train journey and then assumes the role of an invalid and has to be carried from the train. Like Gurdjieff, he applies shocks whenever he is out in public, most strikingly attacking the officers of a bank where he goes to make a large deposit. Finally, Uncle Charlie assumes Gurdjieff's powers of telepathy and is in mental communication with his niece. The villain's full name was Charles Oakley, which is code for choke, C-H-O-K-E. In a crucial scene, Oakley has placed his hand menacingly on his niece's throat. Charles Oakley is a murderer. He's one of these people that marries rich women and kills them. And his niece becomes aware of this, and so he decides to kill her. Look up the shot of the choking. It's quite menacing. This parallel is the cause of Gurdjieff's disrepute. I'm sorry. The idea of the choking, he's choking a woman, this parallels the cause of Gurdjieff's disrepute for the Oragians, which was a supposed sexual assault on a young girl. And this sexual assault on a young girl appears in many Oragian fictions. A photograph showing Oakley's menacing grip of his niece's throat was a powerful image used to advertise the film. Shadow of a Doubt was nominated for an Academy Award and is thought to be Alfred Hitchcock's finest film. So, let me shut up. Orage's literary movement was but one aspect of his plan to influence world history. Following up on Gurdjieff's teachings, about an ancient form of Christianity, Orage was determined to bring into modern time a secular Messiah. This is not conjectural, as the plan is announced in the Oragian version. And I'm going to skip the description, you can read it for yourself, but the idea was that they were going to create in modern time a third Messiah. And that was at the core of these writings. The attempt to influence history through a secular Messiah is at the heart of many works of Oragian modernist literature. How exactly the objective drama was to be accomplished is an unknown, though I will mention that in the Oragian novels that are based on the Jesus story, Jesus survives the crucifixion. The contemporary secular Messiah was given three-dimensional form in Augustus Savage's esoteric sculpture, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Savage's sculpture was displayed at the Pavilion of Contemporary Art in the 1939 World's Fair. The kneeling figure at the front of the harp is the secular Messiah. It was directly modeled on the, Yeah, I'm almost done. Directly modeled on the shed, an ancient Egyptian Messiah. I can stop there. Let me just say one thing. Right now, Thornton Wilder's play, Our Town, is on Broadway. And that play is a summary of the entire Gurdjieff work. So if you want to have a really interesting experience, go to Broadway and sit there and just watch this from the point of view of the work. Barring that, go to YouTube and find the last theatrical appearance of Paul Newman in Our Town. It's a wonderful production, and at your convenience, you can meditate on that and the work will appear. Thank you.
SWR.HDS.Harvard.edu copyright 2024, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.